Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second episode of the Fashion Society podcast series. I'm your host, Kendall Heckstrom, president of the Fashion Society, and I'm here with
your Vice President, Shamaya Plumb. So today we will focus on personal branding, career tips, as well as luxury and fashion brand management. And to dive into these topics, we have a special guest with us here today, David Watts. David is an extremely talented creative director, consultant, lecturer, and podcaster based here in London. He's led numerous teams for prominent retailers such as Marks & Spencer's, Topshop, and many more. Worked with prestigious ready-to-wear companies across the world, ranging from Paris to Rome, as well as lectured at the Condé Nast College of Fashion, and so much more. So we're so thankful to have you here with us today, David.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So, David, I was wondering, in competitive environments, what's the one personality trait that you think actually separates those who succeed from those that don't?
It's a really good question. In my personal view, I think it comes down to passion and determination. I think you can have a lot of skills, you can be very intelligent, and yet you can be incredibly lazy or you can procrastinate. I think having passion also is an enormous driver. And I always say it about, when I'm talking to students or in higher education, if you don't find the passion, particularly in fashion or creative or luxury, you won't have the drive. And it's really tough. They're really tough industries. So if you're passionate about something, you will keep going, which is also really important. And I say that, there will be days when you don't want to do it, but it's also when you truly believe in something. I've spent many decades in fashion, and I'm still as passionate about it today as I was when I started, or when I started reading magazines when I was 13. So I think definitely passion.
I definitely agree with you on that. I think being passionate and just doing what you love, makes it easier, makes the drive easier. So I agree.
Yeah, I think also you have to remember that when people say, follow your passion, at the end of the day, most of us, we're still going to have to go out and find a job to pay the bills, those luxuries like a mortgage or water, food. So you can't just follow your passion, but if you're lucky enough to work hard enough to be able to find the role that you really love and really want to spend your time doing, then you can develop your passion.
Especially in fashion, it's like any creative endeavor you take, you really need to put your heart on your sleeve and kind of just go full force. It's very obvious, and you can tell someone's working in the creative industry just trying to make a quick buck versus it's their true passion. So I definitely agree with that as well.
Well, you see The Devil Wears Prada, and now The Devil Wears Prada 2 is all over the news. You can't escape it. And, that movie is so the first one is so real. It's so realistic, it really is. And if you look at The Devil Wears Prada, the original movie, by comparison to the September issue, which was the documentary about a fly on the wall in a year of Vogue, it's relatively the same. If you take out just some of the kind of dramatic comedy bits, but actually the job, the role, the pressure it's very similar. It really is a very good example of how fashion, and that's fashion publishing, that's not even the fashion, manufacturing industry.
What would be a small habit or tool that you use every day that keeps you staying productive and motivated?
Very strangely, I use a paper diary, and I have a fountain pen, which I've used for more than 35 years. So I always write my diary in terms of, an appointment book, not as in Dear Diary, but an appointment book. But every morning I open my diary when I am literally getting up, and I write on the top of it 2 words. I wrote motivation, and I write mood. And every day I write both, because my motivation affects my mood and my mood affects my motivation. So I will say, like motivation, upwardly mobile, striving, pushing forward today. 1 word, usually 1 word, 2 words. And then my mood, good mood, cheery, bright, grumpy. Sometimes I wake up in a grumpy mood. And it's a really good grounding way of looking at, how you're feeling in that moment. Because how you're feeling in that moment is going to impact hugely on what you're going to do for the rest of the day.
I think especially as an artist, you kind of need to let your mind roam a little bit before you start to consume what other people are creating. Looking at social media, scrolling through Instagram, TikTok, whatever the case may be, just sitting down and giving yourself those couple minutes in the morning to give yourself some morning pages kind of starts your day off.
It's just taking a beat. It's very, it's really interesting. I kind of started doing it because a friend of mine is a therapist, and he was saying to me, that exact thing, you get up, You switch your phone on, it's the first thing you do. You're still lying in bed. You start to scroll. You look at LinkedIn. You look at Instagram. Suddenly you are into it, completely up to your neck. And you're already racing. Your brain is already racing away.
We're seeing a massive shift towards AI right now. How do you think brands could keep their traditions with these new digital standards?
AI is king at the moment. I think, like all technology, sometimes we're a little fearful of the unknown. I think we have already started to see how crazy the AI sphere is in terms of the companies that are running it and managing it. And we're talking about the big multi-conglomerates in the US. From my personal belief, I think AI is a tool like any other technology. And if you know how to use it and you understand what it can deliver and you are clever enough and intuitive enough and smart enough to use it well, it will be an amazing tool. I think in terms of creativity, we are looking at a little bit of a problem. We are facing a crisis in terms of people saying, well, we can get rid of copywriters and graphic people and design people, etc. But you can up to a point, because my belief is AI is like a funnel, and what you put in the top comes out the bottom a little bit more refined. So if you have a limited knowledge, limited creativity, limited innovation, you're going to put that in the top, and it's essentially gobbledygook. And gobbledygook will come out the bottom. So the reality is, if you're really clever, you're really artful, you're really creative, you're really, shit hot, that is what you're going to put in. They'll be the prompts, they'll be the questions, and then what comes out the bottom is going to be interesting things. I think there will be a lot of people who probably coasted for a long time in the creative industries who will be out of work, and that's not a good thing. But I also think that it's going to really sharpen up creativity and innovation across the board over time, and we'll see where we go from there.
In terms of using it with businesses, I think that you're right. It can define and kind of narrow down certain ideas and make things easier. But then you had, for example, Vogue. Vogue released like an AI model photo shoot, and it did not go down well with the audience or on social media. So it will be really interesting to see how people will start accepting AI and how brands will try to be careful with what they say that they're using AI for. I think just right now, since it's more new, if we're just not used to it. But I think in the future, I do think it would become more the norm. So it will be really interesting to see how it plays out.
I think, you make a very valid point. A couple of brands have done, campaigns, and there was quite a lot of brouhaha about, not using real models, and, we're going to move away from real people, real models, et cetera. It's going to damage the industry, which to a point is going to be the case. But 'twas ever the case, technology is always going to make things redundant and make other things more important. When video, VHS was created, people said it's going to be the end of movies, or it's going to be the end of television. When look back through time, every time a technological advance happened, people said it's the end of, whatever came before. Now, in some cases, it changed hugely, but also I don't think we can forget that, we are still human beings. And if you look at, for example, and I always think Amazon and the book situation, and Amazon created the Kindle, and the books are going to be electronic. It's going to do away with books and libraries. And yes, it had a huge impact, and huge book groups, bookstores, went to the wall. But then weirdly, fast forward to 2026, Amazon were opening bookstores last time I heard. People have come back to reading books. I've never seen so many people on the tube in London reading books as I have in the last year. So it's always going to be an evolution, I think. And I think when we are living in a period of, we love that reaction, the clickbait, it has to be a drama. It's all about the drama. So we're all heightened to, be, insecure about it. The media doesn't help because they need, headlines that are going to get us all kind of jittery and, tweeting and twitching about, all these problems and all the unemployment and, people being done away with. It will level itself out over time, in my view, and will probably just make things a little bit better.
Yeah, I think with AI, people kind of have to grapple with the fact that it's already here. It isn't really a circumstance of if you like it or not. I definitely agree that it needs to be used as an aid or rather than a supplement. I think that's what Kendall was mentioning with the Vogue situation. Some people feel like certain creatives are outsourcing human things that really can't be replaced essentially with AI. But as you had mentioned, if you use it as a tool, put it at the top of the funnel, it'll refine it and it'll be a better version essentially. I'm curious to see how AI will kind of evolve within the fashion industry.
We are in a sea of copy paste.
Yes.
We are so tired of the same sort of images reduced to, a blank, background. We're looking at product shots and editorial shots. That used to be the most exciting thing about fashion,
Yeah.
because you couldn't see those clothes until they came into the stores 6 months after you saw them on the runway, which most people didn't see. That was industry. But now we are so ubiquitous, and it's like, but we don't see those cool images or those cool editorials, or at least not very many. And it's become so bland. Or you have to separate fashion out from every other thing. It is the most unique thing. You cannot replicate it. It is so, because it's almost ethereal. You don't know why you love fashion, you just know you love it. And it's so difficult to replicate that. And that's the problem with a lot of the big companies that are taking over fashion brands today. And I think AI will also play into that hugely going forward.
There's a bit of conflict with the demand for sustainability and AI's high energy needs. How can a brand move towards using AI while still trying to be sustainable?
It's a really catch-22 question. Thank you very much. Very tricky. There is no question that the amount of energy that's required to run AI is absolutely phenomenal. And that's a huge problem. And we probably, as consumers, as the general public, we probably don't even know to what extent that is. I mean, I watched a documentary recently. I think it was Google Gemini. I think it was about Google Gemini. I think it was the CEO of Google. And he was talking about the chip that they use to generate, what they need to do to generate this information. And he was saying something, and I'm just paraphrasing because I don't have all the facts. He was saying something like, he held up this chip that was like half the size of a phone. And he said, within this chip, if every single person on the planet simultaneously was doing a mathematical equation indefinitely for like 24-hour periods, it would only use up like 1 second of the capacity of this chip. And this chip, they put 45 of these chips into a box that is then stacked in a box of an additional 100 of these boxes. And that's just a part of what they need to be able to run some of their AI. And that is unbelievable amounts of power. If you look at the resource that's going to be used for that, we're now looking at more nuclear energy, which is a huge shift away from, wind and solar. We're kind of caught in that catch-22 loop again, whereby
Exactly.
you need so much nuclear energy. Didn't we all talk about, 20 years ago, that we were moving away from nuclear energy to all of these natural resources? It is a very strange situation that brands find themselves in exactly the same way brands find themselves in now with fast fashion. If you look at H&M and all the latest going on about their sustainability practices, etc. In a weird sort of counter to the AI thing, like with fast fashion, H&M are hugely invested, doing probably more than anybody else is, but they are still considered to be the biggest fast fashion, fowl that's around, so therefore, can they ever really win at that game? When does it become sort of greenwashing and sustainability? And back to the AI and companies, I think, yes, they are. Of course, they're going to use AI, but it's a little bit like sustainability. Unless you really understand that from grassroots as an individual within a company, it's very difficult to be able to equate and say, okay, well, if we use AI, then we're actually using too much energy, therefore we're not being sustainable. Because that's such a broad statement of fact. You can, not in my backyard, or, it's not really me, we're just doing a tiny little bit of AI. But actually, in truth, it's just so vast. But nobody wants to talk about that because it is so vast. So we are in a bit of a dilemma.
I mean, sustainability is a huge topic right now. And now that AI is a huge topic right now, it's kind of like, which route are you trying to get better at? Do you want to hop on the AI train right now or focus more on the sustainability side? do a little bit of both. I don't know if you can fully do both.
Yeah,
But
it's absolutely true. And I think, part of the challenge to that is, we've become sustainability fatigued. I do a little bit of lecturing, not as much as I used to, but the minute I start talking about sustainability, I know the eyes roll a little bit and say, oh, we know about sustainability. And I'm kind of going, but do you really? Because there's so much in that we still don't understand. And as consumers, we have no idea and no scale of what is currently going on. So I think exactly the same is going to be the situation with AI. We are living in such an instant gratification mindset. We want the information now. We want it instantaneously. We want to know it succinctly. And, our attention spans are shrinking. Everybody's, we know that. The phone, digital has made us very, very impatient. In addition to being able to respond instantaneously, which we shouldn't, but we do, we also want that information immediately. But what we're not prepared to do is to fact check that information. We're not prepared to go and research to see, actually, is that accurate? Because we live in a world of fake news. And, and now AI has made that even more difficult because you don't even know what you're looking at because it's generated by machines. And that is terrifying. I mean, if you look back 15 years, there were TV programs about the possibility of those sort of things happening, and TV series, drama, secret detectives, all these things. And you look at it now and you kind of go, it is real. Facial recognition technology and the whole cloning recreation of images, that is flawless and seamless. You couldn't tell, even experts can't tell, that has been doctored by AI. So, we're living in a very, challenging environment. You have to want to get to the truth and the story and the reality of it, because if you don't have the truth about it, you're never going to be in a position to either support it or to argue your corner.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why it's so difficult for a lot of these big retailers to focus on sustainability, to kind of decide if they're going more so the sustainable route or if they're going the AI route. As you had mentioned, consumers aren't really paying attention. They aren't doing that research. All you have to do is put a tag that says recycled cotton, recycled whatever material, but they're not doing the research behind it. And then thinking about the fact that sustainable practices aren't standardized. So what does sustainability truly mean on a larger scale? Yes. Have you seen any progress within the sustainability practices with the companies you've worked with?
Yes, I have. And I think the smaller businesses, it takes so much more energy and work and dedication from those companies to do it rather than the bigger companies.
Exactly.
But then you look at, programs that like Adidas and, that are an enormous, multi-billion annual turnover. And then you get into the whole conversation about athleisure and, everything that you produce that is going to be a lycra or a stretch or a polyester requires oil to be produced. We have 3 billion barrels of oil used annually just to produce athleisure. Now, 3 billion barrels of oil in the context of, fashion is already the second largest polluter before you even get into the water situation. So, look at, and I'm not here to bash all those athleisure companies, but look at the expansion of, ALO and Vori and Lululemon and, how many others have become multi-billion revenue brands. Okay, well, who's doing all the textile development on, substitutes for that? What about wool? Wool used to be the product. Wool for athleisure, it naturally wicks perspiration away. So who's doing all the advancement on tech fabrics, and not even tech, but the technology for fabrics that could make a difference and a substitute? Because 3 billion barrels of oil, but I suspect lots of people don't know that.
Yeah, I would say the average consumer doesn't know that. I didn't know that. So thank you for that fun fact, because that is insane. Clothing is the second pollutant.
Just the athleisure clothing.
Yeah, which is crazy. Not even considering all the different categories of clothing.
But when I talk about sustainability to some of my students and I say, okay, how many people have more than 2 pairs of denim jeans? Of course, the hands go up. How many people have more than 5? How many people have more than 10? Fashion students, and some people are guilty of, no judgment. But I say, do you know that it takes 10,000 liters of water to process one pair of denim jeans.
I didn't know that.
That is 26 bathtubs full of water. Now, if I take you outside and I have 26 bathtubs filled with water and I have my one pair of jeans and I show you that in real time, you are going to completely change your attitude and your thought process about how denim is produced. And you will start asking questions, which is what I want. And my students going to go, I'm going, just one pair. So if you've got 10 pairs, think of all that water. In countries that are producing denim with spraying and dyeing that don't actually have clean water to drink, whether that's in India, whether that's in Turkey, all these countries. When you reduce that information down to what I call bite-sized pieces and bring customers on board, you're so far ahead of the game because everybody just bombards people with statistics and facts and greenwashing, as you were saying, whereby actually people don't really know the basics. That changes your whole mindset. My students are saying, well, what can we do about it? And I said, well, you can make a pact not to buy more than 2 pairs of denim jeans. And if you do it, and this whole class of 20 people do it, and then we talk to the class next door and say, you don't do it, I said, suddenly you could get, 100 people not buying more than 2 pairs of jeans. I said, if you stop buying them, eventually the manufacturers will stop manufacturing them because nobody's buying them. But we don't believe that we can make a difference as an individual, and we can.
When it comes to secondhand shops and charity shopping, what is your opinion on, if you went and bought jeans from that because it's already made, it's already been used?
I think that's a great idea. I also have a slide on my decks about charity shopping and secondhand shopping because I think the charity shops are facing an enormous crisis whereby they cannot actually get rid of the stuff that they are getting. They can't sell it, and then they are left to have to ship that product probably to another country to actually just to move it through their own warehousing because it's not good. People don't want to buy it. But people feel good about bringing it to a charity shop because, I've done my bit. A little bit like I don't do shopping in fast fashion, but I'll just pop into Primark because I need something for the party. That is an enormous problem. Something else I didn't know until recently, most charity shops won't take books anymore because they can't sell them. We've also fallen into that sort of resale and, the vintage. Not to knock it, Depop, all those things are fantastic, but there is a little hint of greenwashing splashed in there. Also, if anybody's really canny, they're going to be on the doorstep of those really good, shops, secondhand shops, charity shops, and they will get the good things, but that is going to be that's more rare than common, I believe.
Yes.
But actually, I'd be curious to know from you, how hard is it to find good things or interesting things or things that you want to buy?
Well, actually, I volunteer at a charity shop.
Aha.
And so I do agree with you. We get so many donations, and there's plenty that we cannot sell. We just ship it to either a different charity shop through that company, or we ship it to a warehouse. We do get overloaded. I mean, the way that my charity shop has been addressing it is we have a very cheap, 2-pound rack. And so people will come in, they'll buy things. Sometimes they'll buy things that have a little bit of a rip in it, and they'll repair it themselves because they got it for £1. When it comes to books, we actually do pretty okay with books at my charity shop, but I've been to plenty of charity shops where they don't even have a book section. It is really interesting. I think every secondhand shop, especially in London, is different. Even if it's the same company, they're going to be different where you go. From my perspective, it does depend what area you go to.
Absolutely. It's a geography lottery.
The main thing is it takes time. When I go charity shopping, I hit up 6 different stores. I do think it's possible to find anything that you would like, you could find in a charity shop.
Cool. Well, you're a good example of that.
Yes, I know. I mean, I'm confident to say that 90% of my closet is all secondhand shopping clothes. So
That is fantastic. It really is. Also, on top of the fact that we only wear 15% on average of our wardrobe, and everything else just sits at the back end of the wardrobe. I got into that mindset after I went to Australia. I just thought, okay, I'm going to have all the basics. So essentially 2 white shirts, 2 pairs of denim, socks, underwear, of course, some accessories, 2 pieces of knitwear, 3 pieces of knitwear, a couple of shirts, and literally you could have a wardrobe that you could wear, look relatively presentable, and exist on that small amount of garments in your wardrobe. It all does help, but as human beings, we do get caught up with attachment issues to product. It's just a thing, but we place emotional attachment on that, even clothing.
So moving into now the luxury market, do you think that the fashion industry is redefining what luxury means for the next generations?
I don't think luxury is focusing on the new generation. I think we've gone through 5 or 10 years when luxury was only focused on Gen Z. Of course, now we have Gen Alpha. So if you guys have younger siblings coming along, that's who the brands are going to be interested in. You're kind of already over the hill as a Gen Zer. I hate to break it to you, but you're kind of over the hill because it's a little bit like, who came before you, millennials. They were the target market. Now it moved on, and then the focus for the last 10 years has been Gen Z. Now, actually, you'll find that, like everything in time, millennials who went out into the world start getting jobs, start making revenue, start getting nice salaries. They're now the customers of those brands, if they're lucky. So in exactly the same way, the industry is going to wait for Gen Z to get out there into the world and start making income and start spending their money. And they hope they will have planted the seed sufficiently along the way, in the last 10 years for that to make an impact to get you to shop at those brands. I'm a little bit of a naysayer when it comes to all of that media hype that goes on about, Gen Z are only interested in experiences. They're not interested in luxury brands, not interested in historic brands. It's making Gen Z into one thing, which it isn't, because depending on where you live, your socioeconomic situation, your beliefs, you have enormous differences in this group of Gen Z than you do in this group of Gen Z. So to kind of put it all into one collective, I think is incredibly short-sighted anyhow. And then if you put into that, geography, socio-political situations, upbringing, all of those things that shape individuals are going to have a huge impact on how we shop and what we do, and how we spend our money, particularly when we have an income or when our circumstances change. So I think in a strange way, Gen Z are probably not the focus anymore, but I think they are still in the slipstream of the brands who want to get new customers. So therefore, they still are, in the sights of the luxury brands. But I don't think luxury brands are doing anything that I would call amazingly proactively clever to get that attention. In fact, if anything, they're kind of going backwards. The level of service, the standards, retail is having a very difficult time. And also, in a really strange way, and I was talking about this recently with some colleagues, retail has almost gone backwards. You go into a designer luxury store, and if you're lucky, you don't get a somewhat slightly standoffish or even sometimes snooty salesperson who looks you up and down and suggests, are you really our customer? Which you kind of used to hear about 20 years ago. And it still goes on today. And I actually did a comparative shopping session last week in Bond Street. And I won't go into naming names because I've already said it. But, I had some amazing, well, I will say the amazing, I went into the Dries Van Noten store in Hanover Square. And huge shout out to those people. They were so welcoming and so friendly and so helpful and so nice that it was like I spent 40 minutes in that store. Now, I had no intentions of shopping at that particular time, but they were telling me about the collections and what was happening and new things that come in. And it was a really joyful experience. And then I went to another retailer on Bond Street, a brand that I love personally, but the salespeople were so cold and standoffish and indifferent to the point of some of them not even bothering to kind of acknowledge you. And I just thought, do you not understand that you're making me feel slightly awkward? Not uncomfortable, because I wouldn't let anybody in the store make me feel uncomfortable. But I kind of thought, why would I want to come into your store again and spend hundreds, if not thousands of pounds of my hard-earned money when you're giving me, we're not really that fussed vibe? And I wouldn't go into that store again in spite of loving the brand. So I think that's an enormous problem even today. and is impacting hugely on retail. And retailers don't realize it. They all think it's about the product, but actually a huge part of it is about the salespeople and the environments and what they're creating. That it used to be a case of it was that rope outside, and you were kind of lucky to be invited into that store to be able to shop. And we're kind of reverting back to that again. The opening the doors, embracing people, not judging, because you never know what people have in their bank account because they wear holes in the jeans. It's a strange thing, and I've noticed a lot of that recently, again, kind of creeping into luxury retail. I don't know, I could be wrong, but what do you think?
I would say the customer experience is so important, especially when you're talking about these luxury retailers. Like you mentioned, if I'm going in, I'm looking at products that are hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds. I'm expecting the salesperson to be kind, to be nice, explaining the products, explaining the collections, especially when you think about it from a sales perspective. Like, you're taking home a commission from what I purchase working with you. Why would I want to work with you and you're being standoffish, you're not engaging with me, you're not asking me questions? So I definitely think that adds to it as well.
And it is interesting that we're moving back towards that. You wouldn't think that.
You would think it would progress, especially over the years. And as you mentioned, like, they're trying to grab new generations, have people in their stores. You need to have a friendly face.
And I had another experience recently at the RAUL, which is a brand that I love, and their store in Carlos Place in London. And again, I just walked in, and it's a big store, and I just started talking with the sales chap, and it turned out he was Italian, but he was actually black. And I said, that's really fascinating. I said, because I actually was born in Ireland, which a lot of people don't know about. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, where did you grow up in Italy? And he said, small city. And I said, that must have been extraordinary for you, as somebody who is, black skinned growing up in, he said, well, yes, we were the only people that were black. And he said, we had a lot of problems. And we just starting this conversation. And then we were talking about the store and the fashion and the owners and I must have been there for like 45 minutes to an hour. Now, I didn't buy anything. That experience was so, both affirming and also interesting for me, because I love the brand anyhow. But like, I wouldn't hear a word said against the brand now. It's like, the RAUL, yeah, love it. And that is such a difference in a mindset, because that person liked what they're doing. And it's that, to me, it's like, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But if you do, then give it your best, and retail. It's also, I think, partly to do with it. It's a problem in this country because the British have a very weird, still a class thing. If you work in a service industry or you work as, it goes back to, when people had servants, really, I think it's in the DNA. And people look down on people who are in service industries, whether it's waiters, whether it's salespeople. I think it's a terrible problem in this country. But, I thought it was changing, but you still discover that it's not, in every case.
Yes. There is one brand in particular, I think, that does well at this, is Ralph Lauren, actually. In their London store, they have a cafe, and so it's affordable. If you were just going in, you can get a small drink or like a little pastry, but you can still feel like you're a part of that brand. You can walk around the store. When I go there, I think it's a lovely experience. I also love the aesthetics, but I just think it's a great idea because it brings in, Instagrammable moments, but also it just brings in just the cheaper market, and you can still feel so luxury buying a coffee from Ralph Lauren.
You feel included. It's inclusive. It's the difference between pressing your nose against the glass on the outside and having access to the brand or to the store on the inside.
But do you have any personal advice for soon-to-be fashion graduates or anyone with their journey on personal branding?
Try to have a point of view, try to have a unique selling point, have something about you that is of interest to somebody. Because, if you sit down for example, an interview, or you're going for a placement or an internship or anything that gets you a toe in the door of a new opportunity, career or otherwise, have something interesting to say. Why would people remember you? Why would people want to talk to you? I do, in my past, I've interviewed a lot of people and hired a lot of people and run big companies. And I find it really sad when I ask people really simple questions and they look at me and they kind of can't answer. And particularly with me, it's usually related to fashion or beauty, and I'll say, no, what's your favorite fashion designer for what house and why? Now, that doesn't sound like a really challenging question, but the number of people kind of look at me kind of blankly and go, don't really know, I don't really have a brand. I'm kind of going, but you're studying fashion, or you went to fashion school, or you've been doing this, or you're doing marketing, or you're doing luxury. How can you not tell me in this conversation a brand that you like and why? It's challenging. And if they can't tell me, then I'm going, well, you have no interest beyond applying for this job, because I'm asking you what is a passion or what you're interested in. So having a point of view, having something that allows you to stand out from everybody else who's going to be in that room, to me, is the important thing. And that can take you years to work on. It's not an overnight thing, but you have to be able to develop that. And I think one of the core ways of doing that is to read, because a lot of people have stopped reading.
A lot of people don't read.
We have our phones. A lot of people, and, not looking at students in the room, but, they will read academic books if they have to. But my goodness, I've been reading magazines since I was 12, and that's why I became interested in fashion. But people don't read magazines anymore.
Yeah.
People don't read newspapers. So where are you getting your information? You're getting information from a phone that is a very small snapshot of information that you don't verify or check if it's real. Back to our conversations about fake news. And so I would always say, find things that you're interested in. It sounds really cliche. I am an avid consumer. I will, I go to the theater, I go to museums, I go to galleries. Every weekend I will do something. I will make myself do something, even if I don't really feel it. Because if you go to a gallery or a museum or an art show, it doesn't mean you have to go around the entire thing looking at everything. You can just go and find one thing that you find interesting, look at it, photograph the plaque, find out who the artist is, do a little bit of research, go onto Google, that thing that's very easy to do, and just do a little tiny bit of research. You will find something that actually you might be interested in, and it gives you a piece of knowledge. Because when I'm talking to you, you're going to go, "Oh, that's really interesting painting," blah, and you suddenly go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know about that." So, those are little tiny jewels of things that any person should have tucked away to be able to have a conversation, because you never know when you're standing in an elevator or you're introduced to somebody informally that somebody says to you, "Oh, I did such and such and I'm doing art," and you're going to go, "I went to Tate Modern," and it just sparks something. If not joy, it sparks something, and that can be an entree into something that you never know. It could be, my friend is doing such and such, or, "Oh, you like art? We're doing an art show. Go." It mightn't be a thing, but you never know who you'll meet. Or you actually might find something that you really like, and it could change your life.
Yeah, I love that. It honestly goes hand in hand with also finding your personal style, just what you like. I always tell people, if you want to be a well-rounded person, as you had mentioned, go to the theater, read books, watch different movies, listen to different music, read magazines, talk to people that aren't in your main community and your main niche. You need to look
Absolutely.
outside of yourself.
Absolutely.
It's so important that you explore, especially being in a city like London. There's no reason you have a lack of inspiration for anything. There's
And
inspiration
so much
everywhere.
of it is free.
Yes.
So much is free. You go to to Paris or to Frankfurt, and you have to pay 25 euros to get into even the most mediocre. I used to live in Frankfurt. I don't mean that disparagingly, but even the most average museums, you have to pay 25 euros to get in. And over the course of a week, going to museum galleries, it becomes a very big expense.
Yes.
We have all that free
Yeah.
on our doorsteps in London, but also it just gives you something else to spark something. You just never know, because if you live your life just looking at your phone, you're never going to be an explorer. You're just going to
Exactly.
be somebody who just reads feeds, and that, I think, is a great shame.
Going along with trends. Yeah, no, it's sad. And TikTok has made that just
Even
so
worse.
normal. Yeah, going with trends, following influencers. Yeah, at the end of the day, just be yourself and it'll work out, guys.
We certainly hope so.
Well, thank you so much, David, for coming here. This has been awesome.
This has been great.
You've given a lot of good advice and good points that we can all reflect on.
Thank you. It's been very fun. I think, again, without getting into, I'm an old man and I'm kind of talking at you, like it's my own personal mantra. I love finding out new things. I love spending time being curious, because how else do you live, or do you explore things or discover things? So, it's advice I'm giving. It's advice that I follow myself. And thank you for having me.